hello to everybody there at the Academy of Everything. I'm deeply grateful that Jaime has invited me to participate in today's event, all the way from down under in subtropical northern New South Wales, Australia. And my contribution today actually comes with a trigger warning. So if you are a survivor or you're a highly sensitive person, please feel free to cover your ears or leave the room, at least for the first minute and a half of the presentation. I hope you enjoy this very, very deep dive into the depths of my soul. Thank you so much to all of you and to Jaime. Hi, I'm Miriam Perez, and I am the curator of Empires. When I was conceived, it was under rape-like conditions between my father and my mother. Upon birth, I was immediately rejected by my mother. I was tampered with as a baby, as an infant, by one of my relatives. I'm not exactly sure who. I was raised in the Jehovah's Witnesses cult. I escaped when I was in my early 20s, and I have been disowned and shunned by multiple members of my family over the course of my life. I have been manipulated, gaslit, and emotionally and psychologically abused, abandoned over and over and over again. I'm here to tell my story as part of a sacred rite of passage that victims offer to this planet when they continue to choose love and truth despite horrific things happening to them. I'm a lineage breaker. Maybe you want to. Let's have this conversation because shame must now change sides. Years ago, I met Jaime, and together we worked on the 10-year anniversary of SMART Network. SMART stands for Socially Marginalised Art. You may have already heard about this project from Jaime Bautista. And Jaime is a very dear friend of mine. So SMART was an exceptional and is an exceptional attempt to support victims of all kinds, socially marginalised humans who, for one reason or another, found themselves in need of uplifting reminders that they too are dignified humans despite adverse circumstances. They are worthy of a title like artist, even though they might have suffered abuse, neglect, or even have handicaps and disabilities and all sorts of other conditions that would have led to mental ill health. SMART Network was a platform to uplift and inspire these people to believe in themselves despite the harm that they had endured. While I volunteered for SMART Network, I used to think to myself, I'm actually a little bit more of a client than a volunteer. And back in those days, I had very little awareness and understanding of my own circumstances, but I just knew that something was wrong. So, because of all the things that happened to me personally, my ability to numb, to mask, and self-blame led to me becoming a highly competent, high-functioning woman, and yet still a survivor and someone who lives daily with the ramifications of CPTSD, complex post-traumatic stress. Because it has taken me such a long time to really uncover the psychological abuse that I was subjected to over a period of a very long time. My symptoms, my CPTSD symptoms, are like a shell shock that would just reverberate across my life, across stories, and these stories, they now need to be told. So let's see. Stand up if you too are a CPTSD survivor and live with the scars of abuse. If you're standing, you're much more than a survivor. You are extremely brave and you're a lineage breaker. Because for all of our known history, humans have been ashamed to use the word victim. Let me paint you a picture that might help illustrate what I'm trying to talk about here. Can you imagine a dog that was abused by a human over a long period of time? And we think, the dog is shameful for having been in that situation. I mean, no, we don't think that. We treat the dog with dignity and we find it a loving home. We understand it needs critical care and attention. We nurture that being knowing that that dog may never be rid of the triggers and reactions after having lived in hostile conditions. But for humans, we shame our own kind into believing they are pathetic and undignified for wearing the scars of trauma. That is trauma on trauma. Complex trauma arises from a situation where a person with power wields it unfavorably over someone vulnerable. And this person does it over and over and over again for a prolonged period of time, creating emotional confusion and a constant state of fear, discombobulation. And this kind of results in a lot of confusion, a lot of mistrust, and sort of like a chameleon-like identity designed to live in survival mode, in a constant state of survival, in a hostile environment. And usually this happens at a young age. That's what we're talking about here. Someone with power wielding it over someone without power. And this then creates all kinds of neurological, physical, emotional complications throughout the course of life. And this is the part that's the most important. The complications are blamed on the victim, and the complications are the victim's responsibility to solve. So a person who is already in quite a huge state of inability is tasked with the monumental requirement to figure out how to get through life with this huge handicap in a society that elevates perpetrators and shuns the victim. In fact, victim is a dirty word. Is perpetrator a dirty word? Not even a little bit. Oh, God, I hate these fucking things. Maybe it needs to just be like that. So can you imagine what it's like to be a victim of, say, psychological abuse or sexual abuse over a prolonged period of time, and it's shameful for you to talk about what happened to you while the person who did it can carry on living their life like normal. I mean, I think the time for name calling of victims is over, and the time for utilizing this powerful word in its appropriate sense is nigh. If the dog's story can be understood and heard, ours must be too. And this is why I give voice to my story because I am a bona fide victim. Anybody who ever says the words stop playing the victim, I immediately know has absolutely no idea what it's like to actually have been victimized, to have had your power stripped of you, and to have to live in a society that wants to shame you for that. CPTSD is only starting to be understood in the medical profession, in the psychology profession. It is not even in the diagnostic tool yet as a condition. And so we have a really long way to go. Make these stories more heard. I am part of a growing number of high functioning CPTSD survivors who are entering into a more public discourse. We now need better understanding, better vocabulary and sound bites and pathways for victims to properly heal. I wish that I didn't have to have this conversation, but as it turns out, it's me. I'm the one that is now responsible for having this very difficult, very awkward conversation where I have to bare my soul and explain some of the things that have happened to me in an attempt to flip the narrative and create more healing and more understanding for our planet. And I'm really bolstered by the inspiration from Giselle Pellico, the absolute heroine of our time, who coined the term shame must change sides, because if that woman can show up and be a voice for the voiceless, then so many of us have an opportunity to do that now as well. And thank you so much for listening to my story today. I hope that it has been insightful. I hope that it sparks conversation. I hope that it inspires you to be honest and truthful about your pain, about your suffering, because it is only through these difficult conversations that we avoid things like toxic positivity, fake smiling, covering up our wounds to appease others when we are suffering. I think it's time for humanity to grow up, to become mature, to have the words to express this part of our collective experience, and to stop sweeping bullshit under the carpet, frankly. Excuse the French. As you can tell, I am so passionate about this subject, and finding my voice through this has been very difficult. But I am launching a podcast. I have my website up, and I'm going to be starting this conversation. I think we're a very long way from knowing what we need to know around this matter. And I think in this domain, healing lies in the shadow work. So until we cast a light on these darker domains of humanity and have the vocabulary to speak about them openly, they will remain dark, they will remain hidden, and people will continue to experience these uncomfortable realities. So if I can be but a fraction of support in someone else's journey by sharing mine, by telling the truth, by being brave, then I am definitely willing to do that.